I never thought that a wedding invitation would end up being a permission slip for public humiliation. At exactly 3:07 p.m., as the string quartet paused between pieces in the Rosewood Chapel, Jessica hissed loud enough for the front rows to hear, "You're ruining the day just by being here, old lady. Go sit in the back." And as my son Kyle turned away, I left quietly, heart pounding, hands shaking, and slipped out to the venue's service corridor with no one following. My corsage never arrived. My name wasn't printed in the program. I had flown in alone, paid for my own accommodations, and now stood next to a mop bucket like a trespasser in a building I paid to help secure. The hallway was cold tile and disinfectant. Through the vent, I could hear the officiant welcoming everyone to the union of two beautiful souls. I steadied myself on the wall, adjusted the hem of my navy dress, and opened my purse, not for tissues, but for the folder I'd packed last night at the Airbnb. A blue leather binder, worn at the corners, zipped shut with receipts, wire transfer confirmations, and the notarized gift agreement I made Kyle sign when I sold my house to help them build a future. I had hoped I wouldn't need it. I had hoped this would be the day they remembered they had a mother. I heard laughter through the corridor vent. Jessica's, high and sharp, Kyle's trailing behind like it always had. He hadn't looked at me once since I walked through the chapel doors. He kept adjusting his cufflinks, pretending to be busy. Pretending not to notice I'd been pushed out of the front pew, out of the photos, out of the family frame. I took a photo of the program with family guest under my name. I texted it to Diane Bailey, my oldest friend, with one line, "Document everything. Start now." By the time I stepped into the catering prep kitchen and asked to borrow a phone charger, I had already decided I wasn't staying for the reception. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed either. My name is Virginia Cole, retired school principal, 65 years old, and I flew from Colorado to Charleston for this November wedding thinking, foolishly, that family still meant something, even after the way they'd slowly been rewriting my role over the past 2 years. The change didn't happen overnight. It came in inches, calls that stopped coming, updates passed secondhand through Diane or Facebook, and a cold shift in tone from Jessica that Kyle always brushed off as just stress. When I offered to fly out for Kyle's birthday last year, he said they were, quote, keeping it small. Yet a week later, I saw the photos online. A party bus, rooftop cocktails, Jessica's parents grinning on either side of him, while I was tagged in a comment like an afterthought. Jessica never liked my house. She said it smelled old, like books and wood polish. The guest room wasn't good enough. The towels weren't fluffy hotel white. And she hated that I still used paper checks. But she liked my credit. And my guilt. When they were house hunting, she sat across from me at the cafe near her job and said with a little laugh, "We'd qualify for the mortgage if someone hadn't gone into retirement so early." Kyle didn't flinch. I offered the equity from my home 2 weeks later. I stayed in Charleston 3 times during the renovations. Every visit, I was reminded that I was lucky to be part of their process. My name was removed from the utility bills. My opinion on paint colors brushed aside, and Kyle asked me to stop hovering when I offered to help unpack the kitchen. Still, I called it our project. Still, I smiled when they called me the investor. On the flight out for the wedding, I rehearsed what I'd say in my toast. I'd written 3 drafts. None of them made it to the podium. When they pulled my name off the seating chart and dumped me behind a floral pillar, it became clear I wasn't here to be honored. I was here to disappear politely. Back in July, Jessica skipped my birthday brunch, claimed she forgot I wasn't dead yet. And at the rehearsal dinner last night, when Kyle accidentally introduced her stepdad as the only father figure who mattered, I swallowed my pride for the last time. We were seated at a long-rented farmhouse table under string lights. Kyle never strung himself. The caterers kept refilling glasses of overpriced Pinot, and I had just set down a gift for Jessica's mother. Something small, a hand-knit shawl in her favorite color. Jessica didn't say thank you. She didn't even touch it. Her stepfather raised his wine glass, winked, and said something about how lucky Jessica was to have real parents at the table. My hands tightened under the napkin. Kyle said nothing. Then he smiled, and the moment snapped into clarity. They didn't see me as family anymore. They saw me as a placeholder they were waiting to phase out. A week earlier, Jessica had posted a photo on Instagram with the caption, "Can't wait to marry my best friend and build our future with people who truly support us." That word, truly, bit harder than it should have. I'd co-signed the loan for the florist, wired funds directly for their venue deposit, and helped clean out their garage when they were drowning in moving boxes. But support, apparently, had an expiration date. Mine had passed. The worst part wasn't even what Jessica said or didn't say. It was Kyle pretending not to hear it, pretending his loyalty wasn't up for audit. When I asked him later, quietly, outside near the parking lot, why he let her treat me like this, he shrugged and said, "You're tougher than she is, Mom. You can handle it." That sentence, as if it were a compliment, marked the end of whatever illusions I still held about where I stood. This morning, I slipped a printout of that florist invoice into the blue binder. $14,800 for a flower wall Jessica wanted, for the vibe. She said it would be a gift to the guests. But none of those petals cost her a dime. After the ceremony, I found my old friend and former vice principal, Diane Bailey, who now runs a nonprofit for widowed educators, and told her everything as we sat near the catering van, under a string of Edison bulbs and bitter sky. The string lights looked warm in photos, but in person they buzzed faintly, exposing more than they softened. Diane didn't say much at first. She let me speak. I told her about the corsage that never arrived, the ceremony program that replaced my name with a vague family guest, the seat change, the smirks. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. She'd seen it unfold, piece by piece, from the edge of the crowd where she'd quietly stationed herself, keeping an eye on me like she used to do for overwhelmed new teachers. Diane had always been better at spotting rot before it spread. When she heard Jessica's little hiss in the chapel, she didn't gasp. She looked at me. She waited to see what I'd do. When I slipped out during the prayer, she followed. Now she asked only one question. "What do you want from this, Virginia?" I answered without hesitation. "Truth, on record, and control of what's still mine." She nodded, pulled a small notebook from her handbag, and started listing. Wedding contributions, account names, texts and voicemails, legal documents, if any. "If it's financial or reputational," she said, "we treat it like evidence. No emotional edits." That's when I gave her the flash drive. It was tucked behind my driver's license, wrapped in a grocery receipt. "Start with the promissory note," I told her. "It's dated, signed, and notarized." Diane smiled, tight and slow, and said, "Then we've got leverage." Behind us, the kitchen staff smoked near a dumpster. Inside, laughter swelled as the DJ tested levels. No one noticed I was gone. No one asked. My son, still busy playing husband, didn't see that I'd been replaced long before today. Jessica was the reason I sold my old house to help them qualify for the down payment on this $820,000 venue-heavy lifestyle, and I'd logged every check. $110,400 over 3 years, including $3,000 for her dress and $2,200 for a prenup lawyer I insisted she sign. It started with Kyle's call after the first rejected mortgage application. He sounded embarrassed, humble, and young again, the way he did when he needed lunch money in high school but couldn't quite say it. Jessica wouldn't come on the line. She had emailed a spreadsheet instead, formatted like a business proposal, with shared family investment written at the top in bold. That phrase stuck with me, like they were pitching me a startup. I wired the first $35,000 within 72 hours. The house I sold wasn't just a building. It held 27 years of memory, chipped baseboards I painted myself, and a garden I kept alive through 2 Colorado droughts. But Jessica called it a liquidity opportunity, and Kyle said they'd pay me back after the wedding. He didn't flinch when I asked him to sign a simple agreement. He even thanked me, said it was just a formality. I saved that document, scanned, and backed it up, notarized in the county clerk's office with the stamp still clean and visible. It sat in the blue leather folder, behind copies of the final sale, one appraisal report, and a post-it Jessica had left on my fridge once, reading, "Could you throw out the milk? It smells like the 80s in here." She cried when I offered to cover her dress, not tears of gratitude, tears of inconvenience. "I didn't want your money to be the reason I chose something less modern," she said. Kyle patted her back like she'd just endured something noble. I wrote the check the next morning, I had receipts for all of it, wire confirmations, wedding vendor emails, a PDF of her prenup review stamped by a junior associate at the law firm she picked. I didn't need revenge. I needed accounting. At 5:15 p.m., Diane texted, "We're tagging each file. I'll have the timeline sorted before 6. The first red flag was a casually cruel joke she made at my expense during a brunch 2 months ago. I just hope I'm not still working at 65 like some people. And Kyle laughed like it wasn't aimed at me. It was a Sunday, one of the rare times they ask me out. A new farm-to-table place Jessica had been dying to try. I remember the price of the biscuits, $16, and the way the waitress looked relieved when I ordered tea instead of asking too many questions. Jessica wore a wide-brim hat and kept checking the mirror behind us. Kyle was scrolling through real estate listings. He barely looked up when she said it. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. I had just mentioned renewing my contract for 1 more year with the district, helping with mentorship programs for young teachers. Jessica sipped her mimosa and turned to the bridesmaid beside her, some tech friend from college, and delivered the line like it was harmless. I just hope I'm not still working at 65 like some people. They all laughed. Even Kyle. He laughed like it was about no one. Like I wasn't sitting right there, napkin, in my lap, trying not to show how deep it landed. I told myself she was insecure, that her startup was bleeding money, and this was her way of proving she wasn't afraid. But I saw the flicker in her eye when she looked back at me. She meant it. She wanted me to feel outdated. After brunch, she posted a group photo. Bridal brunch with my ride-or-die women. Couldn't do life without you. I wasn't tagged. My chair wasn't even visible in the frame. Back in my Airbnb, I forwarded that photo to Diane with the caption, "Start a separate folder for public slights." Diane responded instantly, "Already done." That night, I pulled the invoice from the brunch. I had paid, of course, my card, my tip. Another $314 logged under pre-wedding hospitality. A week before the wedding, they changed my seat from the front pew to a folding chair behind a column, and when I asked why, Jessica said sweetly, "The florist needed more space up front for photos." The email came from the planner, a simple line in a 3-paragraph update. Seating adjustment for the ceremony. Virginia moved to Section C, Seat 12B. No explanation. No apology, just logistics. I called Kyle and asked what happened. He didn't answer. 2 hours later, Jessica texted me, calling it a creative choice. She claimed the floral arch would block the first row unless they moved a few people around. I was so understanding, she said. I read it twice, then looked up 12B on the venue map. Back row, far left, direct line of sight to the bathroom door. From that spot, I wouldn't have been able to see them exchange vows unless I leaned out into the aisle like a stranger. I responded with a simple, "Understood," but I screenshotted it before I hit send. I told myself it didn't matter, that where I sat didn't change who I was, but the truth is it did. Seating is power. Proximity is acknowledgement. Jessica's family filled the first 2 rows. Her parents, her sister, even a high school friend she once told me she hated. My name wasn't even on the seating board. A clipboard volunteer had to flip a paper list to find me. I arrived early on the day, hoping to fix it quietly. I approached a planner, young, nervous, holding a walkie-talkie, and asked if there had been a mistake. She didn't meet my eyes. She just said, Jessica was very clear. The florist had priority. A floral display had taken my seat. That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. I took a photo of the column. I made sure to include the sign that read, "Reserved for family." Then I turned around, walked to Section C, and took my place behind the structure that kept me invisible. When I arrived at the chapel this morning, they had accidentally forgotten my corsage, replaced my name on the program with family guest, and my hotel room key was disabled by noon checkout. No explanation, just silence from Kyle. The corsage was the first blow. A small thing, technically, but not when every other mother, Jessica's mother, her stepmother, even her aunt, wore identical blush rose pins fastened with gold ribbon. I asked one of the planners if mine had been misplaced. She checked the clipboard, then said, "You weren't on the list." The way she said it, like I had asked for something extravagant. Like I was lucky to even be standing there. I walked to the welcome table, flipped through one of the printed programs. There was Jessica's family tree, sketched in soft green watercolor. Her side of the family had names and titles: mother of the bride, stepfather, sister. On Kyle's side, there was one entry listed simply as family guest. No surname, no note. Just one name, buried at the bottom in pale ink. I stood there holding it while guests streamed in around me, smiling, air kissing. No one noticed that my hand was shaking. I called Kyle, straight to voicemail. I tried the front desk at the hotel next. Wanted to drop off my bag between the ceremony and reception. The clerk smiled politely, checked her screen, then said, "Your key card was deactivated at noon. Checkout was processed by someone else." I had booked that room myself, confirmed a late checkout. Now my suitcase was locked in storage, like I didn't belong there either. I stepped outside and sat on the low stone wall near the parking lot. I remember staring at the rental shuttle pulling in, guests laughing, passing around champagne, and realizing no one had saved me a seat. Every gesture today was a signal. Not loud, not obvious, but deliberate. Death by omission. Right before the reception began, a staff member approached me with a clipboard and said, "You're not on the plated meal list. Buffet only, I'm afraid." And I watched Kyle look the other way as if I were a stranger. The man was polite. Nervous, maybe. Late 20s, wearing a stiff vest and too much cologne. He smiled like he was used to breaking bad news. "They told me to double-check with you before service," he said. "You're Virginia, right? From Section C?" He didn't say mother of the groom. He didn't ask if there'd been a mistake. Just pointed toward the back, where the buffet tables had been rolled out with lukewarm trays and paper napkins. The plated meals were reserved for immediate family and VIPs, Jessica's phrasing, not the planners. I asked if I could speak with the coordinator. He stepped aside and said she was unavailable. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do with my hands, until I saw Kyle across the room near the DJ booth. I raised a hand, caught his eye, and held it there. He glanced at me, held my gaze for half a second, then turned back to the groomsman beside him like nothing had happened. That hurt more than the clipboard. More than the corsage. Because that was a choice. The reception hall had 2 meal lines, one lit by chandeliers and silver place cards, the other set near the coat check. I walked to the buffet line without a word. Took a photo of the sign, General Guest Dining. I made sure to capture the angle that showed the cake table glowing under its custom spotlight. Jessica had insisted on a 7-tier design with hand-painted fondant roses. $3,900. I had covered the deposit, but my dinner came on a plastic plate. I sat at table 19, sandwiched between a college roommate of Jessica's and a couple who'd mistaken me for staff. I didn't correct them. I finished my food, folded the napkin neatly, and started drafting the text to Diane. After I left the chapel and the guests filtered into cocktail hour, I sat in the prep kitchen, furious and numb, and quietly made a call to Diane, asking her to retrieve the USB I'd tucked in the blue leather folder in my tote bag. The kitchen was half lit, clattering with trays and heat. I found a chair near the walk-in cooler, away from the noise, and turned my back to the swinging door. My hands were trembling too much to type, so I called. Diane answered on the second ring. "I'm still outside near the catering van," she said. "Did something else happen?" I didn't answer her question. I just said, "You'll find a flash drive in the inside pocket. It's labeled version 2. Pull it now." She didn't hesitate. "Got it. Do I need to plug it in?" I told her yes. "There's a folder called Play If Pushed. You'll know the one. It's got clips, receipts, statements. Everything Kyle and Jessica thought I'd swallow to keep the peace. I had added the video files just 2 days ago. Voice memos of Jessica mocking my dress, texts Kyle sent, asking me not to tell her how much I'd contributed, and a screen recording of the wedding budget spreadsheet. My initials next to line items that magically disappeared when Jessica showed the final shared costs breakdown to her family. Diane didn't ask if I was sure. She just said, "Okay." Then we back it up. I'll keep the drive with me. You make the call if it gets played. Outside, laughter echoed from the patio as Jessica posed for photos on the marble steps, Kyle dutifully behind her, smile frozen in that soft way he'd practiced in school portraits. I watched through the glass door. He didn't glance back once. I ended the call and took out a pen. On a catering slip, I wrote down the exact time the final guests entered the hall, 5:48 p.m. Below it, I added one sentence. If they want spectacle, I'll give them the truth, dressed for the occasion. I transferred $62,000 out of the joint wedding gift account I had created with Kyle 2 years ago, closing it with one notarized form faxed to the credit union, severing the last financial tie they didn't realize I still controlled. The account had been my idea, originally meant as a safe place to store funds for the wedding and eventually their future home renovations. I set it up with my name listed first, Kyle's second. He never questioned it, just signed where I told him. I handled the deposits, he handled the spending. I watched the balance like a hawk, every withdrawal time-stamped and categorized. Most of them matched receipts, some didn't. I kept notes. 2 days before the wedding, I visited a notary at a UPS store in Charleston. I had brought my ID, the account paperwork, and the withdrawal form, already signed. It took 10 minutes. The notary asked if I wanted copies. I said yes. 3, to be exact. 1 for Diane, 1 for my records, and 1 for the file labeled contingency. Today, just after the plated dinner began and before the toasts, I called the credit union from the back hallway near the restrooms, gave them the confirmation number, confirmed my identity, and requested the transfer in full to my personal account. The representative hesitated only once before saying, "Done. The account is now closed. Final balance, 0. It felt cleaner than I expected. No revenge, no drama, just math. They'd never noticed I paused auto transfers a month ago, or that I'd rerouted the linked email address to a backup inbox. Kyle had assumed the account would stay open, probably figured I'd let it slide until after the honeymoon. But by then, Jessica would have pushed for control, or worse, she'd start using it for things she'd later call joint needs. The balance had dropped from $78,000 to $62,000 over the last 6 months. I logged each use, even when Kyle said it was just a quick thing they'd pay back. They never did. Back in my Airbnb, I printed out the ledger of wedding expenses, bank statements showing withdrawals Kyle made on my behalf, and a signed promissory note he begged me to co-sign when he was laid off during COVID. I had packed the mobile printer last minute, not even sure I'd use it. But sitting at that small round table, alone in a room they didn't pay for, I knew exactly what needed to happen. I opened the blue binder, laid everything out by category, and started printing, line by line, page by page. $3,800 for Jessica's bachelorette trip, just a little help so she wouldn't feel left out. $2,500 for Kyle's tuxedo and groomsmen gifts, even though he told me it was handled. And $7,200 in incremental transfers over 6 months labeled miscellaneous. Always vague, always urgent. Then came the promissory note, dated May 4th, 2020. A single sheet of paper signed in my kitchen. Kyle still in sweatpants, holding his head in his hands because Jessica was threatening to move out if he didn't start contributing more. He was ashamed. He didn't want to ask. But he did. I said yes. The amount was $18,000 for rent, car payments, groceries, and credit card minimums. He promised to repay me within 24 months. I didn't push it when the deadline passed. I just kept the paper, tucked behind a photo of him in his Little League uniform. Tonight, I printed that note twice. 1 for Diane, 1 to slide across the AV booth desk if Jessica or her father decided to dispute my involvement after the lights went down. I also pulled the flight receipt, $719 round trip from Denver, and the invoice for the $900 dress Jessica refused to reimburse, even after telling me it would be a shared expense like everything else. I highlighted her email, "We want this to be our day, but it's a family win." A win I funded, alone. Diane looped in her cousin Lena, a wedding photographer working that day, and Lena confirmed she'd caught Jessica on video mocking my dress and laughing. She really thinks she's family? So we clipped it, backed it up, and time-stamped everything. It was Diane's idea to ask Lena if she'd seen anything. "She's got a good eye for tension," Diane had said. "Always notices what people think the camera can't hear." Lena responded within minutes. She'd been covering the ceremony and cocktail hour, and she remembered Jessica whispering to a bridesmaid right after I arrived. Something about the dress being so navy it's almost black, and how it looked like something a retired secretary would wear to jury duty. Then she laughed. Not a snort or a slip, a cold, deliberate laugh meant to land. Lena reviewed the footage, found the clip. 38 seconds long, clear audio. Jessica's voice unmistakable, the bridesmaid smirking in response, glancing toward me just out of frame. I hadn't heard it in real time. I was standing 10 feet away, smiling at a niece I hadn't seen in 4 years. That clip became Exhibit 7. Diane sent it to me along with a secure drive link and a time-stamped log. We labeled it under a new tab, Verbal Disparagement, Public Setting. But Lena didn't stop there. She had footage from the bridal suite too, burl Jessica had asked for as behind-the-scenes candids. At minute 2:17, she caught Jessica holding a makeup brush and saying, "Virginia's not even technically part of this family anymore. She just paid her way in." Another laugh. Another receipt. We didn't add commentary. We didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself. Jessica, on her wedding day, making sure I was small enough to ignore. I texted Lena directly to thank her. She responded, "You deserved better than how they handled you. Let me know if you need more. I have everything backed up in triplicate." At 5:30 p.m., I returned to the venue wearing the same navy dress, walked calmly to the AV tech at the reception hall, and handed him a flash drive labeled, "Mother of the Groom Tribute, Play at Cake." The room buzzed with the soft hum of clinking glasses, the shuffle of guests repositioning for photos. Jessica was at the head table, radiant and brittle, surrounded by her curated orbit of admirers. Kyle looked drained, smiling too wide, eyes flicking toward her for cues. He didn't see me approach the booth. The AV tech, a quiet man in his 40s with calloused fingers, read the label, nodded, and said, "Scheduled for cake cutting?" I told him yes. "You'll know when," I said. He slipped the drive into his laptop, dragged the file into the queue, and marked it ready. Diane waited by the doorway, her arms crossed, face unreadable. We didn't need to speak. Everything that could be verified had been. Receipts, statements, recordings, each one in its folder, numbered, formatted for the screen. "You sure about the timing?" she asked. I looked toward the dance floor where Jessica was posing for a group photo, one manicured hand on Kyle's shoulder, the other flashing her new ring. "The cake," I said. Always the cake. The DJ cued a pop song, and guests clapped along. I walked the perimeter of the room slowly, scanning faces. Some smiled at me, confused, uncertain whether to say my name. Jessica's mother offered a polite nod, the kind you'd give to hotel staff. My seat card still read, "Family Guest." At 5:59, I checked my phone. Message from Diane. "Video confirmed loaded. You've got one chance. Make it count." I slipped the phone into my purse, pressed my hands flat against my lap to steady them, and watched as the servers rolled out the 7-tier cake, each layer wrapped in white fondant and fragile roses. The photographer shouted directions. Jessica laughed, lifting her knife like it was a sword. At precisely 6:02 p.m., just after the cake cutting, the lights flickered, then cut out briefly, and Jessica's panicked voice rang out. "What's happening?" Before the projector clicked on and the first slide read, "The real cost of this wedding." The room stalled. You could hear forks pause mid-air. Some guests thought it was a planned tribute. A few clapped hesitantly, eyes flicking toward the AV booth. Jessica's smile froze, still holding the knife, while Kyle mouthed something to the DJ. Diane stood at the side of the room, arms crossed. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The opening slide faded. Then the numbers came. Line by line, each expense appeared in plain white text on a black background. Venue deposit, $22,000. Dress allowance, $3,000. Floral wall, $14,800, all paid by the mother of the groom. Screenshots of bank transfers, receipts with timestamps, even Venmo notes for tasting menu deposit, Bach party flights. Gasps started by the third slide. Laughter stopped completely by the sixth. Then came the audio. Jessica's voice, recorded and clear. She really thinks she's family? Followed by the clip of her in the bridal suite. She just paid her way in. A few heads turned toward my table. One man stood and walked toward the exit. Another whispered to Jessica's stepfather, who looked stunned. Kyle didn't speak. Not yet. He was staring at the screen like he couldn't believe it was real. The final slide read, "There's no need to thank me. You never did." The room sat in silence for 3 full seconds. Then, from across the hall, someone clapped. Once. Twice. The sound of it. Intentional, not kind. At 6:05 p.m., I stood up. Calm. Steady. Not a word spoken. And walked slowly toward the side door while the file continued to play. In front of 140 guests, including the Reynolds family, several investors from Jessica's startup, and 2 local news anchors, the screen showed line-item receipts of my funding, voice memos of Jessica mocking my age, and Kyle's texts asking me not to tell her how much I'd helped. The room had gone still. You could hear ice settle in glasses. One of the groomsmen backed away from the projector like it might catch fire. Jessica's mother looked like she was trying to remember where the exits were. Her father didn't blink, just stared at the screen as his daughter's words played on loop. She's not even part of this family anymore. Next came the text thread, projected in full, green and gray bubbles inching down the wall like a slow unraveling. Kyle's words, "Please don't say anything to Jess. She thinks it's mostly her parents paying." Then, weeks later, "Just spot us the venue balance, we'll make it right after the honeymoon." And finally, "Don't make this about you, Mom." That one earned a few audible groans. Jessica stepped forward as if to say something, but Diane intercepted her halfway. Calm, polite, professional, I didn't catch what she said, but Jessica stopped walking. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to blame. Mr. Reynolds stood slowly. Tall man, loud voice. "Did you take our money for this wedding knowing she was footing the bill?" he asked. Jessica didn't answer. Her jaw locked. One hand gripped the edge of the cake table. Kyle still hadn't moved. The projector showed one final image, a scanned copy of the promissory note with Kyle's signature, date clear, notarization seal crisp. I watched his spine straighten slightly as if the air had shifted, and he'd just realized which direction the wind was actually blowing. Diane stepped forward beside me, confirming the documents as authentic, and Mr. Reynolds stood up slowly, asking, "Did you take our money for this wedding, knowing she was footing the bill?" While Jessica froze, pale and mute, her hands clenched around the cake knife. She looked smaller than she had 10 minutes ago, like the corset of that designer dress had begun to crush her ribs. The knife trembled in her hand, still slick from the icing. Someone near the back whispered, "She can't come back from this," and no one corrected them. Diane didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She spoke clearly, stating the contents of the files, the dates, the verification process. She named the credit union, the notary, the photographer. Every fact confirmed, witnessed, documented. No exaggeration, no drama. Just the weight of the truth, delivered clean. Kyle still hadn't said a word. When his father-in-law asked again, slower this time, angrier, Kyle opened his mouth like he might explain. But nothing came. Jessica reached out to grab his arm, but he pulled slightly back, a hesitation that caught the attention of everyone still watching. That moment, barely a shift, was the first time I saw real fear on her face. Lena, standing by the exit, raised her camera halfway and then lowered it again. There would be no toast. At 16 p.m. I turned, took Diane's arm, and walked through the side entrance without looking back. The cake stood untouched. My name, though never printed, had just been written into the room with more clarity than any calligrapher could offer. Kyle and Jessica were left standing alone as guests trickled out quietly, and I walked out holding a slim envelope, signed legal transfer papers returning the condo title solely to me, and the old house keys she'd once called outdated. The envelope was warm from being in my purse, the seal slightly bent where I'd opened it earlier to reread the witness initials. 1 page, 2 signatures, filed and registered. I'd had the documents drawn up 3 weeks ago, just in case. Now they were more than precaution. They were closure. Outside, the valet didn't ask if I needed help. He just tipped his cap and opened the car door. Diane slipped into the passenger seat and set the binder on her lap like it weighed nothing at all. I didn't start the engine right away. We sat there in the dim lot, headlights off, the last notes of a song from the DJ floating through the walls. Inside that envelope was my answer to everything they tried to erase. I gave, they took, and now I took back. Not out of spite, out of balance. I drove away slowly, the venue shrinking in the rearview mirror. Behind me, the lights of the reception flickered on one last time, trying to restart a party that wasn't going to happen.